The Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna and Krishna go to war and have a chat. As always, some questions to refresh your memory. What are some questions regarding the hermeneutics of the Vedas? What is Vedanta? What are the Upanishads? What is yoga and what is a guru? What are Brahman and Atman? How are they related? Part 1. Samsara and moksha. Picking up from last time, we talked about the Vedanta movement, the philosophical and religious thoughts that appeared between the 8th and the 6th centuries BCE. These are the thoughts that sprung out of the Upanishads, the texts that reflected on the meaning of the Vedas and the Vedic culture. We also noticed previously how there were two major claims that came out of Vedantic thought: Brahman and Atman. The first one, Brahman, is the claim that there is a transcendent, eternal reality behind the entire cosmos, even the gods themselves. Brahman is that truth that stands behind everything that we can know or think or sense. And because Brahman is the support of knowledge and thought and senses, Brahman cannot be known, thought about, or sensed by us. However, Brahman is also present in everything, as each thing's given self, its Atman. Because we each have an Atman, a self, there's something about us that is united with ultimate reality. It isn't anything obvious about our bodies, our thoughts, or our experiences. None of those things are our true self. But yet, there's something disembodied, unthought, and unsensed that makes each thing what it is. Its Atman, its particular reality. And as reality must all be united somehow, each particular reality, each Atman, must also be the same as the reality of everything, Brahman. Therefore, there is something about us that is ultimate and everlasting. Well, if there's something about us, a self, an Atman, which is presented by our bodies and minds, but it's not the same as them, that thing must be ultimately real. And then there's something about each of us that's eternal. Something that can't end and never really began. And so the question arises, what was your Atman before you were born? And where will your Atman go after you die? The answer is that your Atman had other bodies and other pasts, and it will continue to have new bodies in the future. This is the process of reincarnation, of the Atman moving from body to body, and it's been going on for all of time. You have been other beings before, and someday you will be a new being. And it isn't just humans either. Everything that has a self is undergoing this process of rebirth and reincarnation. Plants, animals, people, and even supernatural beings like the gods all have Atmans, and therefore they are in an eternal cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Now, note that your mind is not a part of your ultimate self, and so you don't know about your previous incarnations. You can't remember them, because you had a different mind when you had a different body. And likewise, your future manifestations will not remember your life now. However, there are things which affect the Atman, whether you remember them or not. These things, which leave a trace on the Atman, are called karma. The word karma is just the word for work or activity, something that you do. So you act all day, every day, and every possible action has a number of effects on both the world and on you yourself. Your immaterial self, your Atman, changes and develops in response to your never-ending activities, your karma. Your karma changes who you are, so you become smarter, or more noble, or stupider, or more evil. And because that Atman doesn't die when the body dies, the effects of your karma continue on into new lifetimes. In turn, those new lives will accumulate their own karma, developing and evolving even more, getting affected by their past karma and affecting their lives to come. And this happens again and again and again, just as it's been happening for all of time already. This cycle of karma's movement from life to life is called samsara. Samsara, meaning wandering, how karma and Atman move across history, is a process. The samsara connects all living beings together, from the most powerful gods to the lowest blades of grass. Everything performs actions, building more karma, and that karma plays out in future actions and future incarnations. In one sense, the wandering path of one's karma, samsara, can explain the morality of the universe. If something bad happens to someone who doesn't seem to deserve it, it could be that some previous self brought this tragedy about. This might help someone address the problem of evil, why bad things happen to good people. But there's also a very negative conclusion this takes us to. You can't escape your karma. You might be harmed by some action, by some karma from a previous life that you have no memory of. And so there's something of a trap to samsara too. While it might be nice to think that you can inherit the positive effects of your karma, like being born into a good family or even being born as one of the devas, one of the gods, it also means that you're always stuck with your karma, and you're destined to suffer for the misdeeds and stupidities of countless selves over endless lifetimes. And so the question presents itself. Is there some way to escape samsara? Is there something you can do to shuck off your former karma, or to stop accumulating negative karma in the first place? Is there a way out of samsara? If there is, it's called moksha, setting free or liberation. An Indian thought of the late Vedic period, from the 8th to the 6th centuries BCE, was plagued by this dilemma. Now, there are many answers to the question about how we could possibly break the cycle of karma that we're predisposed to. We're going to discuss just one of them in a moment. We'll discuss another one, called Buddhism, another time. Part 2. The caste system. There is another important side effect to the accumulation of karma. When we're born, we inherit the effects of our previous lives, both good and bad. So therefore, it stands to reason that where you were born in a given society, in a given social economic status, or within a certain ethnicity, that's a result of your own previous actions. The ancient Vedic Arya created a hierarchy to reflect this belief. They divided everyone into 4 major varnas, classes or castes of people. And each of these varnas were assigned certain duties. Each person had their own dharma, their own responsibilities and duties based on the class, the varna, that they were born into. The upper caste we've met already. These are the Brahmins, the priests and the intellectuals of the Arya. They know the Vedas, they perform the rituals needed to appease the Devas. They comprise just under 10% of the Hindu population today, by the way. Below the Brahmins were the political and military ranks of the Arya, called the rulers, kshatriya. Their dharma was to fight in battles and to maintain the political order. And when the Arya arrived in the subcontinent, they didn't just have Vedic priests and fighters with them. Remember that there were a nomadic cattle-driving people, so many of the Arya were also herders, Vaishya. And as the Arya grew more settled, the Vaishya caste grew to include anyone whose livelihood depended on production, so not only herders, but also farmers, bankers, and merchants. And below these three varnas were the people that the Arya subjugated, who came to be their servants, or Shudras. The Shudras are the service people and laborers to the three Arya castes of Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. Now, these four varnas are often provided as a formal blueprint for human society. In theory, you're born into a caste, a varna, and that never changes. Your station in life was defined even before your birth, and your dharma, your duty to the gods, society, and your family, is determined by that. You marry into your own varna, and your children will be born into the same varna as you, without exception. A place for everyone, and everyone in their place. But the reality both in the past and today is much more complicated. First, there are many subclasses within each varna, and these groups do not identify themselves or each other in one consistent way. Next, caste groups break apart and recombine based on historical circumstance. So, in a certain village, a farmer might be considered a Vaishya, while elsewhere the farmer is considered a Shudra. Sometimes there will be a subclass distinction based on occupation or diet, which elsewhere would be considered irrelevant. And also in the subcontinent today, there are many circles of people who want to wipe away the caste system altogether as an outdated, aristocratic, and possibly racist worldview with no place in the modern world. And most importantly, about 20% of the Indian population aren't in one of the four varnas at all. This huge section of the populace is commonly referred to as the untouchables, though starting in the late 20th century, they started to call themselves the Dalits, the oppressed. These are the masses of the poor who don't fall into the Vedic caste system and are often severely ostracized for it. Now, since the 19th century, there's been a push to end this untouchability, and following Indian self-rule in 1947, untouchability has been technically illegal. But, as discrimination is wont to do, it's still quite common in practice and lived reality. And in some modern settings, by the way, Dalits might be considered a fifth varna of their very own, alongside the more ancient four. Part 3. The Lord's Song. Now, we have quite a number of ancient Hindu concepts under our belt, so it's time to activate them. We're going to look at a single, complicated artifact of Hindu thought in detail over several discussions. We're going to read several long sections from a Hindu poem called the Bhagavad Gita, and we're going to use what we now know about the Vedas and the Devas, the Upanishads and the Varnas to help us understand this text. Oh, and by the way, the Bhagavad Gita is not any old text. It's probably the most read and influential piece of Sanskrit writing in the world. Even though it's not considered Shruti, heard from the gods via ancient sages, like the Vedas are, the Bhagavad Gita is considered a central religious text to nearly all living schools of Hinduism. And once again, whether or how the Western category of scripture applies to it isn't exactly clear. The text of the Bhagavad Gita probably hit paper for the first time between the 5th and the 2nd centuries BCE, although it certainly descended from older texts we no longer have. Actually, the Bhagavad Gita wasn't primarily a text at all at first. Like the Vedas and the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita was first an oral performance that was later written down. In fact, the work in question is actually a song. The name, Bhagavad Gita, literally means the Lord's Song, and it really is sung. Here is just a short sample of it.
धृतराष्ट्र उवाच धर्मक्षेत्रे कुरुक्षेत्रे समवेतायुयुत्सवः मामकाः पाण्डवाश्चैव किमकुर्वत सञ्जय सञ्जय उवाच दृष्ट्वा तु पाण्डवानीकं व्यूढन् दुर्योधनस्तदा आचार्यमुपसङ्गम्य राजा वचन.
Neat, right? Well, unfortunately, most of us don't know Sanskrit, and I'm a terrible singer, so we're going to have to do just with me reading the text of the song in English. The Bhagavad Gita consists of 18 teachings, or yogas, across 700 verses. Actually, the Bhagavad Gita is just one small subsection of a massive Indian epic called the Mahabharata, probably the longest epic poem ever put to paper. It's about 200,000 verses long. The Mahabharata, this massive epic, tells the story of a great royal family that's torn in half by a dynastic feud. On one side of the conflict are the Pandus, or Pandavas, 5 brothers and their immediate families, who are roughly the heroes of the story. The Pandus are fighting their cousins, the Kurus, or Kauravas. Now, although it might be tempting to think of this as a story of good guys versus bad guys, the poem itself often reminds us that they remain a single family, and that no one character is without sin or virtue. Further, because many of the players on both sides of this conflict are gods, kings, or supernatural beings, the warfare is cosmic in scale. The world is doomed to ruin and chaos regardless of whoever actually wins the battle. Now, the Mahabharata is extraordinarily complicated, with hundreds of named characters whose various subplots overlap and intersect. But here are those people who play a major role in this little subsection called the Bhagavad Gita that we're going to be looking at. First, there are the 2 principal characters. Arjuna, the third of the 5 Pandava brothers and the leader of their military forces. He's a famous bowman and a chariot fighter, and probably the most noble of his brothers. The word, Arjuna, means a reflective shade of white, like a pearl, or the moon, or milk, or lightning. Arjuna's friend is Krishna. Now, for really complicated reasons, Krishna is equally compelled to help both the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And so, rather than fighting himself, he agrees to enter the war, but only to serve as Arjuna's chariot driver. In other words, he's not going to fight himself. The name, Krishna, means blue-black or dark-skinned. Now, most of the Bhagavad Gita is a conversation between Arjuna and Krishna, and so the meaning of their names, white and dark, is probably not coincidental. Oh, and by the way, Krishna also happens to be an incarnation of the high god Vishnu, but we'll learn more about that as we read the poem. There's also 3 other people I'm going to need you to know. Don't worry, I'm going to remind you of who's who whenever the names crop up again. There's Vyasa, who's actually the poet who wrote the whole Mahabharata, and therefore he's the author of the Bhagavad Gita too. He also happens to be a character within the story he's telling. So even though Vyasa is the poet of this poem, he appears in it from time to time. Dhritarashtra, the father of the Kauravas and the uncle of the Pandavas, is the king, the one whose throne the major characters are fighting over. Now, although he loves his own children, the Kauravas, he also cares deeply about his nephews, the Pandavas. They're kind of like sons to him too. Now, Dhritarashtra is blind, and therefore he's not participating in the war personally. He has an advisor named Sanjaya, who is something of an escort of King Dhritarashtra. Sanjaya has the gift of clairvoyance. He can know what's happening a great distance away as it's actually happening. Now, because King Dhritarashtra's blindness, Sanjaya can relay to him what's happening in the battlefield, even though neither of them are actually there. Actually, most of the Bhagavad Gita itself is Sanjaya recounting to the blind King Dhritarashtra what is happening between Arjuna and Krishna. Got it? The story begins with the arrival of an apocalyptic war between the cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The armies are lining up, and far away the blind king Dhritarashtra asks this clairvoyant servant, Sanjaya, what is happening on the battlefield. The battlefield, by the way, is called Kurukshetra. And so the Bhagavad Gita begins. Dhritarashtra said, "Assembled there on Dharma's field, Kurukshetra, desiring war, what did my sons and the Pandus do? Tell me now, O Sanjaya." Sanjaya then responds by recounting the names of the many mighty heroes and masters who come to fight. Now don't worry about who they all are here, just listen so you can build the scene. Sanjaya said, "Here are heroes, mighty archers, Bhima and Arjuna's equals, the great warriors Yuyudhana, Virata and Drupada too, Drishtaketu, Chikitana, the valiant king of Kashi, Parujit and Kantibhoja, and Shaiba, all the best of men, and courageous Yudhamanyu, and valorous Uttamaujas, Subhadra's and Draupadi's sons, all who are mighty chariot warriors. Here too, O best of the twice-born, those distinguished amongst ourselves, the leader of my army here, these now I recount to you. Yourself, and Bhishma and Karna and Kripa, victorious in war, Ashwatthama, Vikarna, and Somadatta's son, all are mine. Also many other heroes who now risk their lives for my sake, discharging various weapons, all very skilled in waging war." So all these great mythical heroes are lining up, right? And then each one is going to blow their conch shells, and the earth itself shakes in anticipation about what's going to happen. Then we flash over to Arjuna, the hero of the Pandavas, and he's standing in his chariot, driven by his friend Krishna. Then, seeing all of the ranks standing marshaled, about to fight, Arjuna, with the banner of Hanuman, was compelled to take up his bow and speak unto Krishna, the Lord of the earth, these fateful words. Arjuna said, "Krishna, place my chariot in the midst between the armies, so from that place I might observe those who are here prepared for war, desiring to begin battle and to know with whom I have to fight." Sanjaya said, "Commanded thus by Arjuna, O Lord, then Krishna drove that grandest of all chariots between the two hosts, and there stopped, thus facing Bhishma and Drona and the rulers of the whole vast earth. Behold, O Arjuna," then he said, "all the Kurus assembled here." Now remember, the Pandus or Pandavas and the Kurus or Kauravas are cousins. They grew up together. Arjuna isn't fighting strangers. Then Arjuna saw assembled there fathers and grandfathers, teachers' sons, maternal uncles, brothers, and grandsons, as well as friends of his. Arjuna, seeing there in both the army's relatives, fathers-in-law and companions, stood and contemplated them all. Then, filled with infinite pity and filled with despondence, he spoke. Arjuna said, "Krishna, I see my own kinsfolk, desiring to fight, approaching. Through sorrow my limbs now fail me. My mouth is parched with grief and woe. My body now is shivering. My hair is standing up on end. My bow is slipping from my hand. My skin is burning as with fire. Nor can I even stand upright. My mind is reeling and confused. Inauspicious omens I mark, and not good fortune do I see, O Krishna, if I destroy my own kinsmen in this battle. Nor do I desire victory, no, not kingship, nor yet pleasures. Kingship, enjoyment surely mean nothing to us, O Krishna. Those for whose sake we should desire kingship, enjoyments, and pleasures array before us in battle, abandoning life and riches. Teachers, fathers, sons, grandfathers, maternal uncles and grandsons, fathers-in-law, brothers-in-law, and many other kinsmen too. Even if they wish to kill me, I could never wish to kill them. Not even to rule the three worlds, how much less for rule of the earth. Indeed, what pleasure could be ours from killing the Kurus? Sin would only take hold of us if we should slay these aggressors. We are not justified to kill our kinsmen, the Kurus. How, having killed our own people, could we be happy, Krishna? Their thoughts overpowered by greed, they see no wrong in destruction of family or even in wreaking treachery upon friends. Yet why should we, O Krishna, who clearly see the evil caused by such destruction of our kin, not turn away from this fell sin? On destruction of families, their rights of dharma then die out. From the destruction of dharma, non-dharma overwhelms them all. Oh, alas! We are now resolved to do great evil with our greed, for royal pleasures, for whose sake we intend to kill our own kin. If the Kurus with weapons armed should slay me, though unarmed, yet that would still be a greater happiness for me. Sanjaya said, in the midst of the battlefield, thus speaking, Arjuna cast down his bows and arrows and sank down, his mind overcome with sorrow. Sanjaya said, to him who was thus overcome by pity, and whose eyes were filled with tears, downcast and despairing, Krishna spoke these words. The Holy Lord said, whence has come this faint-heartedness of yours in this time of danger, ignoble, not leading to heaven but to disgrace, O Arjuna? At no time should you entertain such cowardness, unsuitable. Abandon this faint-heartedness. Stand up, O scorcher of foes. Arjuna said, but how can I in battle fight with arrows, O Krishna, against Bhishma and Drona too, who are worthy of reverence? Better I eat the food of beggary instead of slaying these great-souled gurus. If I kill them, my enjoyments in this world of wealth and desires would be stained with blood. Indeed, I can't tell which would be better, that we conquer them or they conquer us. The sons of Dhritarashtra stand facing us, after whose slaying we wouldn't wish to live. Weakness and pity overcome my being. My mind in confusion, I supplicate you. I say decidedly, what is my duty? I'm your disciple. Do direct me. I see nothing that can remove this sorrow that dries up my senses, though I should attain the unrivaled and prosperous dominion over the earth and mastery over the gods. Sanjaya said, having said this to Krishna, Arjuna, scorcher of his foes, then further said, I shall not fight, and fell into a silent deep. To him who thus was despondent in the midst of the two armies, O Lord, as though smiling, Krishna then spoke these words. The Holy Lord said, you have been mourning for those who should not be mourned for, though you speak words of wisdom, for the wise grieve not for the living or the dead. Truly, there was never a time when I was not, nor you, nor these lords of men, nor in the future a time when we shall cease to be. As to the embodied, childhood, youth, and old age arise in turn, so he gets another body. The wise are not confused by this. Truly, material contacts produce cold, heat, pleasure, and pain. Impermanent, they come and go. Learn to endure them, Lord. He whom these things does not afflict, the same in passion or in pleasure, that wise one, O leader of men, is fit for immortality. The unreal never comes to be. The real does never cease to be. The certainty of both of these is known to those who see the truth. That by which all is pervaded, know that is indestructible. There is none with power to destroy the imperishable. These bodies, inhabited by the eternal embodied self, are declared to come to an end. Therefore now fight, O Lord. He who thinks the self is slayer and he who thinks the self is slain, neither of the two understands. The self slays not, nor is it slain. Neither is the self slain, nor yet does it die, nor, having been, will it ever come not to be. Birthless, eternal, perpetual, primeval, it is not slain whenever the body is slain. In what way can he who knows this, indestructible, eternal, birthless, and imperishable, slay or cause another to slay? Even as a man casts off his worn-out clothes, then clothes himself in others which are new, so the embodied casts off worn-out bodies, and then enters into others which are new. This self by weapons is cut not. This self by fire is burnt not. This self by water is wet not. And this self by wind dried not. This self cannot be cut, nor burnt, nor wetted, nor dried. It is changeless, all-pervading and unmoving, immovable, eternal self. Unmanifest, unthinkable. This self is called unchangeable. Therefore, knowing this to be such, you surely ought never to mourn. And if you think this self to have constant birth and death, even then, O mighty armed, you should not be impelled for this reason to grieve. Of that which is born, death is sure. Of that which is dead, birth is sure. Over the unavoidable, therefore, you never should lament. All beings are unmanifest in their beginning, Lord, manifest in their middle state, and unmanifest then in their end. And looking at your own Dharma, you surely ought never waver, for there is nothing better than a righteous war for warriors. Fortunate are those warriors who thus are called, O Arjuna, to fight in a battle like this, that comes to them as heaven's gate. But if you refuse to engage in righteous warfare, Arjuna, then forfeiting your own Dharma and honor, you shall incur sin. The world will also ever hold you as a craven reprobate. To the honored, such disrepute is surely worse even than death. The great chariot warriors will believe you shrank back from battle through fear, and you will be lightly esteemed by those who thought much of you. Your enemies, then cavailing at your great prowess, will then say of you things not to be uttered. What could be greater pain than this? By dying, you attain heaven. Conquering, you enjoy the earth. Therefore, O Arjuna, rise. In strength of heart, resolve to fight. Make pain and pleasure, gain and loss, victory and defeat the same. Then, engage now in this battle. In this way, you shall incur no sin. We're going to keep reading from the Bhagavad Gita for the next few classes. But for now, some things to think about. Identify samsara, moksha, and karma. Explain the varna or caste system. What is Arjuna's dilemma in the Bhagavad Gita? What is Krishna's first response? This is the translation of the Bhagavad Gita that I'm using, but please note that I edited the translation quite heavily. I do think it's the most readable translation, despite several other problems, but just know it's not exactly the way it's going to be if you look it up.